You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 7th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
The ongoing struggles of US President Donald Trump to understand how tariffs work, what is gracing the catwalks at Paris Fashion Week, and King Charles III reveals his personal playlist. Put the champagne on ice, Slipknot. I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. It's Friday, so it's our mostly in-house daily, and the almost suspiciously Australian lineup of Monocle staffers includes Nick Monisse and Grace Charlton. Plus, we'll find out what Charles III listens to while unwinding after a rough day's kinging, and we'll have our weekly wrap-up of what we learned since last time we were gathered here. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and we will start with the United States and the tariffs President Donald Trump has imposed on imports from America's neighbours to the north and south. Unless he hasn't? No, he has. Hang on, I'm hearing now that he hasn't, etc. Having imposed swingeing tariffs earlier in the week, thereby provoking retaliation in kind from Canada and Mexico and prompting earfuls from annoyed American exporters and alarmed American consumers, Trump has now, and for the second time in the last couple of days, exempted another bunch of goods from such penalties. Well, I'm joined now by Andrew Thompson, journalist and political risk analyst specialising in Latin America. Andrew, it's a bit of an evergreen question where President Trump is concerned, but is any strategy discernible here, or is he just making it up as he goes along?
I think it's certainly been chaotic with one set of announcements following another. I think the constant is that Trump does like tariffs. He thinks they're very good, and he thinks they will protect the US economy and bring jobs that have been, in his view, gone to Canada or to Mexico. Tariffs will bring them back home and basically help him with his political base and win popularity. The difficulty, of course, is that a lot of economists and particularly business leaders don't see confusion over tariffs as actually helping. They see it as making the situation worse. And that's partly why stock exchanges around the world have been quiet and falling.
I mean, when you say they've been quiet and or falling, do we get the idea that at this point the markets have just started to figure out to factor this in, that nobody panics either when Trump imposes tariffs or withdraws them because nobody knows how long they're going to last?
Yes, I think there's a degree of adapting to the new reality, which is a much higher level of uncertainty. And I think that has bad effects, both for countries like Canada and Mexico, who are the main trading partners for the US, but also for the US itself. If you just allow me to tell you one small story, as a result of lower tariffs, the automobile industry has spread out different types of plants in both the United States and in Mexico. And supply chains are deeply, deeply integrated. So one particular auto component may cross the border 7 or 8 times before it finds its way into the finished car. So what Trump is effectively saying to automobile companies is you could have to pay a 25% tariff every time this thing, this gearbox or whatever crosses the border. And they're saying we can't plan our business if we don't know what kind of tariffs we'll have to pay.
Well, let's look at Mexico in particular, because this is a country against which Donald Trump has always harboured an especially intense animus. What have you made of how Mexico, in particular, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, have responded?
Well, I think to date, over the last 2 months, she's played it just right. So she's combined listening to Trump, appearing, respectful and helpful to his concerns, with at the same time, for her own electoral base, assuring that Mexico will retain its sovereignty and be treated as an equal. So her catchphrase is cooperation, not subordination. And what we've seen basically since Trump took over the presidency, is that she has been doing a lot to meet US concerns. The flow of fentanyl, this opioid drug, from Mexico into the States has fallen by around 40% between February and the month before, January. She's seized 29 imprisoned cartel leaders and just basically put them on a plane to the States, where they've all been arrested and will face long trials. She's sent 10,000 extra troops to reinforce the border. So she has quite a lot quite a lot behind her, saying, "I've taken this seriously. You must hold up your end of the bargain, which is do not impose crazy tariffs on us, and let's continue what's largely a free trade zone."
If she's done all that, though, having not previously done all that, is there an argument that, chaotic and unpredictable though Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs appear, that they have actually kind of worked?
You could make that argument, particularly if you say Trump's position is understandable. He wants to stop drugs coming into the United States. He's raised this big hullabaloo, and he's actually got some concrete measures out of the Mexican government, which will help. However, there are also counter arguments. The fentanyl drug trafficking, isn't just the responsibility of Mexico as a production and transit country. It's also the responsibility of the United States, which is the biggest consumer of illicit drugs in the world. So there's this struggle between, do you go for Trump's transactional win-lose approach, or do you argue instead that a number of cross-border problems are best solved throughout cooperation? And Trump's first, if you like, port of call is not cooperation. His style is to be much more aggressive and to seek concessions after that.
How is this playing for President Sheinbaum at home in Mexico, though? But the reason I ask is that obviously on the other side of the United States northern border, Donald Trump picking a trade war with Canada has almost single-handedly brought the Liberal Party back from the dead. The spike in pre-election polling numbers is absolutely extraordinary. If they do win the next election, they really should send President Trump a big bunch of flowers.
Well, I think just to follow that thought, Claudia Sheinbaum might be preparing her bunch of flowers to send to Trump. Her approval rating has hit 85%, which is the highest ever registered by a Mexican president. And the polling shows that Mexicans are supporting her over deportations, as well as over the bilateral tariff issue. So this is a really good time for her. She was also very canny. When Trump announced the 25% tariff on Tuesday of this week, the Canadians responded immediately, saying they would take countermeasures. And Sheinbaum said, well, I'm not responding immediately. I think these tariffs are wrong, but I will announce our position at a mass rally in the Zocalo Plaza in the middle of Mexico City next Sunday. This is this Sunday coming. So after that, she had a telephone conversation with Trump. And then Trump said, well, actually, the tariffs are off for 30 days. And she has said, oh, we're still holding a meeting at the Zocalo Plaza, but it will be a meeting of celebration about the advances we've made. But she will not kind of rub Trump's nose in it, because I think she knows that would be counterproductive. But with her own supporters, which include many of Mexico's leading businessmen, she is going through a sweet spot.
Just as a final thought, we've been talking a lot about Europe this week and about how Europe has started to think about making other arrangements for its own defence and security, on the assumption that the United States may no longer be a reliable partner. Are we starting to see anything of the same sort of conversation in Latin America about trade? Because obviously the United States is a colossal market for all of Central and South America. But is there any conversation around maybe we do need to find slightly less volatile places we can sell our stuff?
Yes, I think that's happening, but probably not as rapidly and substantively as in Europe. So Scheinbaum in Mexico, excuse me, has said that they will look at diversifying exports. 80% of Mexican exports go to the United States. So you are deeply, deeply dependent on the president of the United States, whoever he or she may be. And they're talking about diversifying. The problem, of course, is that all across the northern part of Mexico, you have a major industrial zone that has been built on close integration with the US economy. So turning that around into a more diversified structure is not a kind of short-term thing. It's really a 5 to 10-year project. And with other Latin American leaders, that's beginning to be discussed, but no one has quite figured out what would be involved.
Andrew Thompson, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio, and it is more or less exactly halfway through Paris Fashion Week. And joining me now from exactly that is Monocle's Associate Editor, Grace Charlton. Grace, first of all, give us a flavour of the week. What does one do on a Friday at Paris Fashion Week?
Bonsoir. I'm currently
apart from learning the language.
I'm currently, I kid you not, standing in the smoking area of a cocktail party with a view of the Eiffel Tower. Isn't that too much?
Are you wearing a beret and playing a tiny accordion?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent,
sure, of course.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Other than that, what have you been up to today?
Today's been good. I went to the Issey Miyake show, which was incredible. They've got a creative director called Satoshi Kondo, who always stages these really conceptual, sort of performative shows, and the clothes were really amazing, like deconstructed knitwear and crazy hats and lots of pleats, as we've come to expect from Issey Miyake. But otherwise, I think a big part of Fashion Week that maybe people don't talk about is the running to different appointments and different showrooms to look at the collections and actually feel them. So I've been doing a lot of that today, getting my steps in.
When you talk about Issey Miyake's hats being crazy, how crazy are we talking?
Okay, so picture gloves sort of wrapped around your head and, pointing to the top. It's quite hard to describe. It's a beanie, but it's made from gloves.
Okay. So these are gloves worn on the head rather than, as is traditional, on the hands.
Exactly. We're really rethinking. We're innovating.
Can you see it? Can you see it catching on?
Weirdly, yes, because Issey Miyake have such a dedicated fan base. It's a real sort of niche brand that has a set of cult followers who will probably be wearing the beanies as hats.
If you're not wearing one on your return, I'm going to be disappointed. What else have you seen while you are there?
I've seen quite a few Danish shows, actually. I went to Cecily Banson and Canny as well. So it's quite interesting to see how Copenhagen Fashion Week was this really big thing, and those two brands started in Copenhagen, and now they've sort of graduated, for lack of a better term, to Paris, where they want to be, taken a little bit more seriously. So I think Paris is for the big players, but it's an interesting shift to see. Yeah.
I mean, is there a recognisable Danish aesthetic in fashion design? Because there obviously is in furniture design in particular. If you say to somebody Danish furniture, they immediately start thinking of stylish, practical, unfussy, utilitarian items. Is their clothes much the same?
Yeah, definitely. It's quite commercial as well. Like a lot of the clothes that they send down the runway are very wearable. It's a lot of like beautiful knitwear and coats and accessories. But actually the two brands that are now in Paris that I mentioned, Cecily Banson and Canny, they're way more on the maximalist side. They've got, Canny loves to clash prints and add a fur detail and do lots of layers. And then Cecily Banson has a really recognizable ultra feminine aesthetic, like lots of, tutus and big flowers. So it's funny that actually the two brands that have come to Paris are the ones that are not as minimal as the ones that you'd associate with Copenhagen and Scandinavian style.
And it says here, Grace, that I am supposed to ask you about Big Cuffs, who I assume is not a French magician.
Big Cuffs. I know, I love just sort of seeing recurring funny little trends, and I swear cuffs are the detail of the season at the moment. At Dior, Maria Grazia Curie, she sent these big sort of austere black coats down the runway with huge cuffs just left undone, almost like there's like a shortage of cufflinks going on in Europe, because Prada did the same in Milan, and Toga, this Japanese brand, also included that in her show in London. So it's a recurring. Honestly, cuffs are the next big thing.
So we are all going to be wearing big cuffs and gloves as hats.
Exactly. That is amazing. Well, main two takeaways.
If those are the takeaways from Paris Fashion Week so far, what are you looking forward to this weekend?
So this weekend, I'm going to go see Matter and Shape, which is a new design salon. It's actually where I'm standing right now. There's an opening party because today was the first day. But it's been really interesting to see a design salon curated for fashion people and the kind of crowd that gathers. I think Nick Monisse, Monocle's design editor, is feeling a little bit confused about all these people in their long leather trench coats and, stylish haircuts. He's a little bit aghast.
It's funny you mention Nick, Grace. You have cunningly foreshadowed our next item. And with that, I shall leave you to your fancy cocktail party. Grace Charlton at Paris Fashion Week. Thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. It has been reported today that the architect Ricardo Scofidio, best known for New York City's High Line, has died at the age of 89. Well, earlier I spoke about his life and legacy to Monocle's aforementioned design editor Nick Monisse, and I began by asking how representative the High Line is of his legacy generally.
I think it's that it is so unconventional. I mean, Andrew Mueller, I am a landscape architect by training. This is my passion. The High Line is the project that actually really set me off to kind of study it. Their whole practice worked very closely with a landscape architecture studio called James Corner Field Operations. And I think the fact that one of his defining projects is something that crosses disciplines, that blurs boundaries, that's about, it's less about the ego, more about an exploration of an idea. I think that is incredibly beautiful and incredibly representative of the sort of work that he did. It wasn't just about delivering, looking at the footprint of a site and being like, look, we can get, if it's an office building, we can get 80,000 square feet of office space here, or, 50 apartments in this volume that we have to work with. It was about elevating the spirit. It was about pushing forward ideas, exploring cross-disciplinary collaborations like they did with the High Line in New York. That's what kind of made him so significant, and the work that, their whole studio, Dillis, Scofidio and Renfro did and still does.
But that one work in particular, the High Line, as representative of what he was all about, how influential has that been alone?
I mean, that alone spawned a host of, I guess, spin-off projects across the globe. They're working on one in London right now. There's been other ones in Miami that have taken a similar concept. There's one called the Underline, which is literally, rather than the High Line was about building on top of an abandoned railway line and building a park there. In Miami, they built the Underline, which is essentially using the abandoned land underneath an elevated railway as a park. So it was really about reconceptualizing the way that we look at the built environment, the way we look at maybe what might be considered an architectural ruin and reinterpreting that. But equally, there are projects like the Broad Museum in Los Angeles. You've also got, they oversaw the renovation of the MoMA in New York. These are projects that, again, it's about lifting the spirit. It's about the conceptual aspect of architecture, which I think, and I again, not to make this all about me, but, going to design school and you're so conceptual, you're so idealistic. And then once perhaps you start practicing, you maybe lose a little bit of those kind of value and that ambition and that love, and it just becomes delivering the bottom line. When you look at their portfolio, this doesn't seem to have happened.
It's important to remember because he was always punctilious about including his wife whenever he was offered any credit for any work he'd done. He was very much half of a partnership, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Diller is how it starts. Liz Diller, his wife, is how the studio name starts. I think it says a lot. I think this is like one of those wonderful things. There's an amazing creative partnership. They clearly were a sensational foil for each other and somebody to bounce things off. I think, it's important to remember that delivering any sort of work of architecture requires working with people, with a whole team of people. I mean, we talked about James Corner at the top there and his landscape studio and them partnering, but also obviously there's people within your own studio that you need to work with. So I think obviously Liz, it's an incredibly tough time for her, but the work that they were able to do together over the course of many decades is simply phenomenal.
I mean, the High Line is obviously his greatest hit, but other than that, are there any particular favourites of yours?
I mean, it would definitely be the MoMA, not least because I like shopping in the gallery shop there. But it's just this amazing building. You kind of enter through a light box and then you're taken up through, I guess, the more darker upper levels of the gallery space. But I think, again, for me, it was his ability, I'm using the MoMA as an example, when you walk into that space, it's kind of like an atrium-like entry. It's in the middle of New York. It's in the middle of Manhattan. There are tour groups in there. It could be potentially an incredibly, incredibly intense space to try and get tickets to the various exhibitions. When you're in that space, you somehow still feel calm and relaxed. They've done something amazing with the volume there. I wish I could actually put my finger on it. That's probably why I'm not a celebrated architect. They've done something incredible with the volume there, incredible with the natural light, but also the artificial light in this space. And I think it's this lifting of the spirit that is so special about projects like the MoMA. But equally, and I've only ever seen it from the outside, but the Alice Tully Hall at the Lincoln Center, it's got this amazing kind of cutout that as you round a corner, you kind of suddenly find yourself underneath the actual building, which is simply phenomenal. So this is coming back to this conceptual part of it that I'm talking about. It's these ideas that would be much easier to leave on the cutting room floor to engineer out because of price reasons. But when you ultimately deliver on them, I feel like you start to see the value in investing in good design and adventurous architecture.
That was Nick Monisse, Monocle's design editor, speaking to me earlier. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. This is The Daily with me, Andrew Mueller. It is, in general, probably wise to be sceptical about any musical preferences declared by occupants of lofty offices. Such playlists are often compiled by much younger flunkies hoping to present their employer as down, to at least some extent, with the kids. Nevertheless, as Commonwealth Day looms on March 10th, still time to put up your decorations, the subjects of King Charles III will be invited to share his favourites on an Apple Music radio special. Monocle Radio was right here, Your Majesty, and at least based in Britain. Among KC3's selections, it says here, Grace Jones, Kylie Minogue and Bob Marley. Well, joining me now is Kate Hutchinson, music journalist and host of the Last Bohemians podcast. Kate, first of all, before we get into the actual music involved here, what strikes you as the point of this undertaking as a whole?
Well, I think King Charles says that he's trying to lift the spirits and celebrate joy, which is clearly something that we need right now. And judging by the playlist, it seems that he wants to try and connect with a younger audience, with some of the sort of more contemporary artists that have been pulled out and put on the playlist. I mean, maybe he's got one eye on Obama's very popular summer playlist series, or maybe he just fancies himself as a selector.
But this is always the thing, though, with it is that question of authenticity. It's whether the person getting behind this playlist you can actually imagine genuinely listening to this stuff. With Barack Obama's playlist, which you're right, I think is a pretty clear inspiration here, it's not hard to imagine that this is actually what he listens to. But do we really imagine King Charles sort of sitting down with Nightclubbing by Grace Jones?
I mean, the thought of King Charles busting out some moves to something by Grace Jones or humming along to Get Up, Stand Up by Bob Marley or whichever Bob Marley track is on the playlist does definitely raise an eyebrow. Apparently, this playlist is going to be accompanied by a video where he outlines his personal connection with the music. But this might include, as highlighted in the press release stories, as when the King saw Ray at a concert at a Christmas market at the former Battersea Power Station where Apple has its London headquarters. So that doesn't sound premeditated at all, does it?
Not in the slightest. We are going to play now some selections from his playlist, and then I'm going to invite you, Kate, to see how easy you find it to imagine him actually sticking this on the Buckhouse stereo. This is Davido.
I suppose she locates, but I go by Belgium. My money na alele, high pressure. But it's like she balaba, put on for high tension. You must apply your team, big boy, you must supply plenty.
That's Davido with funds. He is, I mean, you can see he's trying to do the Commonwealth thing here, and Davido being a Nigerian American, I think just about qualifies. But again, does this really strike you as KC3 sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting way to spin an eclectic playlist for sure. But I never really thought that I had anything in common with King Charles. But now I know that I can sit down and discuss, his deep love of Afrobeats. So that's great. I mean, I'm a big Davido fan. But at least I know we'd have something to talk about.
Indeed. He does cite one or two more mainstream pop faves, like, for example, my fellow Australian Kylie Minogue. Now, I can tell you, Kate, and I can tell our listeners that went over a storm in the production booth, but can we really imagine the King, I don't know, attempting the same sort of manoeuvres?
It might be tricky, wouldn't it? I haven't seen the full entire playlist, but I think, in his teens, he was in his teens in the 60s. So, the big pop music of the day would have been the Beatles, things like that. I don't know if they're going to, be included on the playlist, but I think he has had some sort of, as I understand it, some pop moments. But it definitely feels like he's had some help here with sort of steering the playlist into more contemporary territory.
But this is what I always wonder about with exercises like these, whether or not they do actually impress anybody. Like, would it not at least be more authentic if he revealed himself to have, the musical taste one might expect a man in his 70s of aristocratic bearing to have?
As I understand, there might be some a nod to that with some inclusion of some 1930s crooners, and I'm sure it will go through the generations for sure. I mean, yeah, there's been definitely a few gaffes, certainly with UK politicians when it comes to their music tastes and lack thereof. And I think it sort of points to a sort of sad reality that music doesn't quite have maybe the same currency that it once did. It wasn't the sort of generational obsession that it once inspired among these people. I mean, I'd much prefer, instead of creating a playlist, that the King started talking about how to sort of support musicians, or how to get better deals for them in the streaming era, and how to stop live music venues from closing.
Well, I'm going to play one more track, or an excerpt of one more track, and then I have a question attached to that, which I also think is part of the problem with exercises such as these. But this is Ray.
Baby, baby, you can go ahead and cry. Baby, 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 would you really go ahead, and would you go ahead and just cry?
That is Ray, apparently a favourite of King Charles III. And the question I wanted to ask finally, Kate, was, is there a concern that it's a bit of a poison chalice, that if you are the King or the Prime Minister and you come out and endorse a particular modern pop artist, you may not be doing them any favours. You may instantly render them somewhat stuffy and establishment by association?
I mean, I suppose there's always that risk. And, there's been plenty of artists who've spoken out about not wanting their music used at rallies, for example, or to soundtrack particular politicians doing this, that and the other. I don't know whether anyone really... Do musicians care if King Charles is... They probably think it's a bit of a laugh, don't they? I would take it that way anyway.
Kate Hutchinson, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, it's our weekly attempt to figure out how much the wiser we are versus this time 7 days ago. We learned this week of a partial success in the field of artificial speciation.
Huh? Really?
What? I don't understand.
What's the deal with that?
Artificial speciation, the science of creating new species via human intervention. It is a common expression round our way.
I
get it now.
Righto, carry on.
We learned that boffins, who had set themselves the task of reconstituting the woolly mammoth, sure, why not, had fallen arguably somewhat short and come up instead with a woolly mouse. We learned that the white-coated Poindexters of frankly misleadingly named outfit Colossal Biosciences were trying to style this out as a work in progress, claiming that the admittedly luxuriantly fluffy rodents had mammoth-like traits, which is somewhat like arguing that one's garden shed has Sydney Opera House-like traits. Sure, they're both buildings with doors and a roof, etc., but come on. We learned, nevertheless, that the bespectacled weirdos responsible, in their short-sleeved shirts all buttoned all the way up to the top and biros in the breast pockets, are insisting as of this broadcast that they will turn loose the first full-grown artificial woolly mammoth not later than 2028. Doesn't matter, lads. Girls still won't talk to you. Anyway, sticking with the subject of friendless oddballs labouring to make a case for a lumbering pachyderm with unruly ginger blonde hair, we learned what a profile in courage really is. We learned this from US Vice President J.D. Vance shortly after his Oval Office berating of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is, of course, a simpering effete milquetoast who has never passed any test sterner than staying at his post and leading his nation's resistance at the moment of invasion by one of Earth's biggest militaries, advance elements of which were under specific instruction to kill him personally. Honestly, who does he think he is?
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to...
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories.
For we learned that Vice President Vance's heroics did not stop at having watched the news from time to time. We learned that on a subsequent ski outing to Vermont, where his motorcade was greeted by no less terrifying a menace than a few hundred shivering citizens swaddled in parkas and brandishing somewhat uncomplimentary placards, he bravely, and with no thought at all for his own safety...
The New York Post is reporting that Vice President J.D. Vance was forced to move his family to an undisclosed location after pro-Ukrainian protesters swarmed the ski resort where he was vacationing.
Humbling, it truly is. But all leaden sarcasm aside, we did learn that there is one group of people to whom Vance genuinely is willing to stand up and tell it like it is, i.e. the safely dead soldiers of the Allies who have fought in America's wars these last few decades.
The very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
Been about that long since America won one, mind you. Maestro, the national anthem of Lesotho. For we learned that there is at least one country which does not, as of this broadcast, figure in the fevered dreams of conquest indulged by Vice President Vance's immediate superior, and we learned this from the interminable oration before Congress of US President Donald Trump, during which he listed some of the outgoings he claims to have clipped from the foreign aid budget.
$8 million to promote LGBTQI+. In the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of.
Listeners may not be entirely shocked to learn that efforts since by inquiring media are yet to locate one LGBTQI+ citizen of Lesotho who possesses the least idea what Trump was talking about. However, avid listeners to Monocle Radio's The Foreign Desk, like there are any other kind, etc., will have heard of Lesotho because we had the king on once.
I can't speak for other monarchies, but speaking for myself, I do tend to use the opportunity, and whenever I meet other heads of state or even heads of government, to, if I can put it that way, put Lesotho on the map.
Yes, we're showing off. Live with it. The Foreign Desk. Every Saturday at midday. Do tune in.
Come on. Just get on with it.
And we learned, possibly hearteningly given the trajectory upon which the world in general appears determined, that bad ideas can be unhad. We learned that UK-based financial services concern Aberdeen had decided to reinsert the E's into their name, which had been Aberdeen, as in the handsome Scottish city, until 2021, when some marketing genius who may not have been one of Aberdeen's wiser investments suggested that they, if you will, disembowel themselves, resulting in a name which absolutely nobody could pronounce.
Aberdeen?
See? We learned that Aberdeen have now thought better of this and will once again be Aberdeen. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our guests today, Andrew Thompson, Grace Charlton, Nick Monisse and Kate Hutchinson. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening.